Is it time for a mind shift? If you don't know what that means, then join your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Christian pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years, along the journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of faith, life, religion, and spirituality.
I'm so happy to welcome the Thinking Atheist, Seth Andrews, to the show. He's an author, speaker, YouTuber, podcaster, and like me, ex-evangelical. So welcome to Mindshift Podcast.
Well, you're very kind. I always like to clarify, though, that I am host of the Thinking Atheist. I think the Thinking Atheist is really more of an icon. It's sort of a reminder to me and everybody else to engage brain, to reason things out. You know, I'm no great thinker. I think I come out of a faith culture. And I want to continue to remind everybody that faith is a terrible way to figure out what's true. So let's think on these things.
Yes, I know. I do want to get into that. And I know you've talked about your backstory and everything on a million shows, but I wanted to compare stories with you. I was thinking, too, that we need to get some thank yous out of the way because we have some, I guess, mutual friends, kind of how we met up on Twitter just the other day. I mean, I've been following you for a long time, and I really enjoy your content. But David Madison, I just did a show, Dr. David Madison, his book, 10 Tough Things That Christians Wish Jesus Hadn't Taught. Then he turned around and said, you are actually narrating the audio version. So we do have a connection there. And I think also, you know, Janice Selby, who's a good friend of mine from Canada. So yes, I think you've had the Godless Moms on your show as well. So yeah, we have some mutual friends and some thank yous to clear out of the way.
That's cool. You know, whenever I saw Madison's book, it took a sort of an angle on the New Testament Jesus that I had not seen. And I've seen a lot of content about this, but his angle was different and compelling. And, you know, the book is an easy read, easy meaning it's fluid. But if you're a devout believer, it's, you know, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to challenge you in many ways. And so I pinged him and I said, hey, man, you know, if you don't have a narrator for this thing, I would love to be a part of it. And so, yeah, the audio's done. It's been submitted to Audible for final approval. Any day it should be available at audible.com. And I'm excited to see it happen.
Yeah, it's so true. We have to get that out of the way, too, that you've got that voice, don't you? I mean, I know everyone says it, but I mean, you've got the voice that we all wish that we had. You know, you've got this amazing, I actually listened to, well, what decided me, I bought your Audible version of your book, Confessions of a Former Fox News Christian, actually last night. We were supposed to do this last night, but there was a little scheduling mix-up, which I'm actually glad of now, because I was telling you before we hit record, I went out and bought the Audible version. I've been listening to it on the way to and from work just today. And it's kind of like this, Seth is just this soothing, voice in your ear, easing my drive to and from work.
Thank you for that. Well, you know, I was fortunate when, you know, my voice and vocal style sort of helped me enter the world of radio back in 1990. And you know, a lot of us sort of sound like we graduated from the same college. You know, a lot of us have that same kind of sound, you know, Q102 FM. Don't forget to be listening tomorrow morning to Mark and Mike and Mandy in the morning. You know, we do.
Absolutely.
But, you know, I think that for a movement that needs storytellers, I really think, you know, we change minds mostly through sharing experiences and telling the stories of, you know, who we are and what we're about. I came along at a good time, you know, and I was thankful that my ability to communicate sort of served the movement in that way. And, you know, it's been, 12, 13 years and I'm still kicking. So I'm grateful for that as well.
Absolutely. So how does a book like David Madison's fit into your sort of, I don't know if you want to call it a project. You said you're not the Thinking Atheist. You're just the voice of the movement or something like that. But one thing I appreciate about your approach is obviously you could be an angry atheist and maybe you were at some point. I don't know. We could get into that. But how does that fit into it's kind of debunking Christianity, but as you say, it's not a polemic, I don't think, against Christianity, is it? Like, it's a very easy read.
At least in the first half, it isn't as
Yeah.
much. The first 10 chapters are, a dissection
Mhm.
of the New Testament with challenges to go deeper. And then in the last portion of the book, the final 2 chapters really start to get a little edgier and say, come on, come on, let's
Really?
take a really good. But, I want to be a part of projects that speak to me. And I also know, and I don't mean this in any sort of an egotistical way. I think I've just been fortunate to have a relatively large footprint in the movement.
Mhm.
I've got an audience in place, and I've established that audience. We've become quite a community and family over the last 12 years. And so when I know that my participation might be able to give a signal boost to a worthy project whenever possible, I do try to do that. I get a lot of requests. I mean, I get a lot of requests.
Imagine.
Read my book. Hey, can you check out my 400 pages? Or can you watch
Sure.
my movie? Or can you, do this or do that? And I just don't have the bandwidth for that. But I do what I can. And when I see, David Madison's project being such a worthy one,
Mm.
just like I did with Dr. Joshua Bowen, who had written the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 1. I pinged him and I said, this is amazing. Do you need a narrator? And of course, that ended up being a massive project. I think that was like 11 hours and 45 minutes of recorded audio, much of it in Sumerian, or me trying to learn to speak Sumerian
I was
words.
gonna say, do you know Sumerian just off the top
No,
of your head?
I don't know Sumerian. I did more phonetics and pronunciation emails and phone calls over the course of 3 or 4 weeks. It was amazing. But, I like Dr. Hector Garcia's Alpha God was a great exploration into the human primate and our violent gods that are so often male deities. Why does that happen? And how does it relate to our evolved nature? And Lee Bervine's The Kafir Project. I mean, if it's one of those things that really speaks to me and it's a good fit, sometimes if I'm asked, or I may actually ask those involved, hey, what do you need? How can I help? And as in with Josh Bowen, his book, it was out there, but when I was able to sort of lend my voice and my name to it and integrate it into the work here, it just went to, another level, and everybody wins. It's just a win-win for all of the parties involved. And that's really what I want. I think, we do what we can where we can. And if I have the opportunity to benefit, then I want to do that whenever I can.
It's so ironic, isn't it? Because the verbiage that you're using, I mean, we used to use that language in Christianity. I want to help other people. It's all about community, and we all should win. Isn't that ironic that those same values still resonate, but you're not promoting Christianity anymore?
It's a human thing. A lot of people talk about some of the things that we do as atheists, whether it's getting together at a convention, or we have some special event, or we enjoy communal music, or we have an inspirational speaker, or whatever. And I've heard people, they'll frame that, well, you just went to atheist church, as if church owns those things. And that's just not remotely true. The church is amazing at community. The church has had thousands of years to hone the processes. It's why some of the Sunday assemblies actually emulate church models for those types of things, because they've developed a pretty effective model, but there. The best things that we enjoy and that the church sort of imbues into its model, those are just human things, person to person, human to human, voice to voice, eye to eye, touch to touch, human contact and human support through difficult times, sharing life experiences together, uniting for common goals so that we can go out and make the world a better place. This isn't a religious thing. This is a human thing. And I think we as atheists, we're finally starting to wake up that we're not being religious when we do those things. We're being humans, and the church just grabbed it and co-opted it and said they own it, but it doesn't mean they do.
Yeah, spiritualized it. Yeah, it's true. They have sort of the prepackaged community. And that's one of the things obviously many people have said, haven't they, that you can walk into any church pretty much and you'll be welcomed. You'll be, some don't, but and that's one thing I guess they do well, maybe up front anyway, till you get sucked in, and then some of the toxicities.
Some of them
later.
have welcome ministries. They
Sure,
teach
absolutely.
we're going to have the coffee here, and here are the sweets and donuts, and
Mm,
here's how you hold yourself. Don't cross your arms. That's a defensive posture. Make eye contact. Don't use these words. Use these words instead. Make sure you physically touch them, shake their hand or hug them or whatever. There are whole lessons, processes, classes taught in how to welcome people.
mm,
And, there's some benefit, I think, some utility in learning how body language works, et cetera. But so many in the church, they have ulterior motive. Makes it sound like many of them are operating in a sinister capacity. I don't think that's
mm,
the case. I think they genuinely, though, they want people to feel welcome, so they'll stay and then come back the next week. And they want to build the church family and ultimately build the kingdom.
mm.
Whereas you and I, I'd like to think we're friendly regardless, just
Yeah.
because. And if we want to keep somebody off the defensive and what's not, it's because we realize that they may have been through something and we want to
Mm,
encourage them to live an authentic life. So, there's a lot of similarities, but I don't think it's quite the same.
mm. It's so amazing, isn't it? The longer you've been out of the church, I don't know what your experiences are, but I've been out for probably 10 or 12 years. And someone told me once, they said, in order to understand how people saw you when you were an evangelical, you should find someone who's never been religious in their life. They have never had any exposure to church or Christianity or religion, and explain what you used to believe, and just watch the reaction on their faces.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever done that, but I was telling a friend of mine the other day, I was telling her about me growing up as a kid in a fundamentalist church, which it sounds like you did as well. And just watching the reaction on her face, talking about harvest parties instead of Halloweens, and all those kind of things. We aped everything the world had, didn't we? But it was somehow sanctified, and we were supposed to bring our non-saved friends and family. So there was always that missional element to it, wasn't there?
It's a reinforcement culture.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody around you talks like that, things like that, acts like that, and it
Probably
becomes
looks
your
like you.
normal. I did a speech called The Copycats that addressed some of what you were just speaking about, aping what's going on in the culture, mimicking
Mm-hmm.
what's popular. And that's why when I was in Christian radio, whenever there was a pop song that was hugely popular, there was an artist, a sound, a look, an image that really took off. You wait 6 months, there was a Christian equivalent of it that would pop up. We had
So
Phil
true.
Driscoll, he sounded like Joe Cocker. If you liked
Mm-hmm.
Paul McCartney, we had Phil Kagi. If you liked Wilson Phillips, we had a band or a trio of women called Sierra. And we had all of these sort of Christian versions, thinking, well, if you like the worldly version, you'll love the Jesus
Yeah.
version. We
There's some
weren't
genre for
original.
everybody. That's
Yeah,
so
we,
true.
we were just essentially copycatting everything that was going on,
Mm,
and poorly. Quite often, we just did.
yeah,
It was a pretty bad carbon copy.
it's so
But
true.
it's one of those things where I think mainstream contemporary Christianity is desperate for legitimization, to be accepted in the mainstream. It was sort of the holy grail when I was in Christian radio to see a band who would do what we call crossover,
Mhm.
meaning that you didn't just get airplay on the Christian music top 20, but you might get crossover airplay on the American top 40 and secular
Mhm.
radio, pop and rock radio stations around the country. And the rare occasions that happened, it was like this huge victory. And we felt
Yeah,
like we were sending the message of the kingdom out into the world, man.
yeah, we're
We were
getting
pretty
there.
proud of ourselves.
Yeah, the Michael W. Smiths and Amy Grants of the world. Well, now actually,
Yeah.
you and I are pretty similar in age. We're only a couple of years apart. So you obviously grew up and you were in radio. You knew the Stripers of the world, those kind of bands. See, I was a Christian metal band guy in Seattle. I grew up in Seattle, so I played drums for about 10 or 12 years. We tried to be Striper, because
Yeah.
they were like you said, they were a big crossover, but they had number one legitimate MTV hits of their albums or hit singles, so we were so proud of
Yeah.
Striper for that very exactly the same reason you just articulated. And it's amazing how it
We
works.
felt
Now,
legit. We felt legit. Like
yeah.
here we are. We're no longer, the bargain basement special. We're not just
Mhm.
the also rans. Now we're out there playing with the big boys.
Yeah.
We felt like we
Yeah.
joined the major leagues.
We were, yeah, you said 6 months, but we always felt that we were at least 5 years behind the times. As soon as music changed, then And what happened to us, when we started getting a following we were playing up and down the West Coast, and then the whole grunge scene exploded in Seattle in the early 90s, and metal was just gone. Literally just,
Yeah.
how music is, just click of a switch, man. And it was
Yeah.
gone. So I went off to Bible college and that was it, man. So it's just amazing how this stuff works. But I was thinking too, now you grew up in a fundamentalist background similar to me. This is why I'm about halfway into your book, maybe 2-3 hours in, and I'm thinking, okay, I can resonate with what Seth is talking about, because you're telling the story about growing up in Oklahoma, but you just sort of imbibed the cultures, the values of the Christian nationalism and the Rush Limbaughs and all that kind of stuff. How did that work? Because you say you inherited this worldview. How can you describe that for us in terms of this sort of inherited view that you sort of received, I guess, from your parents, your church, and all that?
Yeah, well, my mother and father had sort of downloaded their religious beliefs into me, and we were just sort of told, this is what you believe. I mean, we were told we have a choice, but we didn't have a choice. Yeah, right. Yep. If we didn't toe the line, if we really challenged and asked the hard questions and rejected, I mean, there would have been pandemonium. My dad would have been he would have melted down. And my mother would have as well. But along those lines, because you are filtering everything through that religious lens, then everything else is informed by it. So how I felt about non-Republicans, well, that was filtered through my religion, because non-Republicans are more likely to be non-Christians, and they are more likely to abort babies, which makes them, baby killers. This was the language I used at the time. Those abortionists, they're waging war on sacred life and the human soul created by God. I was a Christian nationalist. I really felt like we were the greatest simply because we were. Loved my country, not because I had really determined its merit, but because, hey, this is where I was born. Man, this, I love it or leave it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, right to die issues, I disagreed with that because it's God's decision. Death penalty, I kind of had an eye for an eye kind of attitude about that. Drugs and, all these other things, reproductive choice, they were all filtered through my religious lens. And man, that's easy to do when you start with the God answer with a capital A and you embrace it wholeheartedly, and everybody else around you is that way. And I was a teen activist. I was a spokesperson for Youth for Christ, and I was out there on the front lines on stage leading school chapels and in student council and speaking before crowds about my faith. That feeds the ego. You feel like you're a crusader, man, that you're making a difference. You get attention. You're affirmed constantly. There's probably 50 gears in that machine as to how it all works. And I think ultimately I come back to that word affirmation. It's constant affirmation. Hey, you're doing great. This is what you've been called to do. Playing to your gifts. You will be rewarded in heaven. And it's really hard to step off that hamster wheel, man. It's really hard to give that up in favor of a much more complex and often messy world.
Well, how much in terms of your own religious indoctrination do you feel like you've kind of had to recover from? Because it's ironic, as I just bought your book, I thought, well, I'm going to start it this morning when I'm heading to work, because I want to get a couple of good hours in before I talk to you tonight. But I'm actually right in the middle of Dr. Marlene Winnell's book, Leaving the Fold, which is also on Audible. And I know she was just on your show not too long ago. I've had her on as well. And it struck me that when I got to the chapter she talks, I think it's chapter 6, where she talks about what happens to adults who were raised in a fundamentalist context in terms of the psychological effects, the religious trauma. It really hit me, So I was thinking, well, I want to ask Seth that. Do you feel like it did? Did you suffer religious trauma syndrome? Did you, go through any of those things that you had to rebuild as an adult?
Yeah. In the 18 months that I was really committed to finding out if it was real and if it was true, and I think I knew the answer long before I admitted I knew the answer. I didn't take a year and a half. I think I over the course of time had begun to really realize there's some huge red flags here, But it was a pretty rough time in my life. I was coming out of a marriage, and I, I was dissatisfied that the employer that I work for largely served churches. And, what happens if all this is not true? I mean, what happens to me, my life, my career? I'm getting kind of long in the tooth to start again. What in the world would I ever do with myself, And I was terrified of hell. I had been raised to believe, depart from me, you who are cursed, into a lake of everlasting fire. And I thought, what if I'm wrong? What if I get this question wrong? I don't want to burn, I was threatened with hell by many people who realized I was going through questions. One person said, on my family tree, said, "Oh, you're going to burn." Now, that's a quote.
Exact words.
And I really had a fear about that. It kept me up at night. My gut was in a knot. I didn't know who I was anymore, And I asked Dr. Winnell about it. I'm like, it's not like I escaped Islam in a Middle Eastern country where I feared for my life and any of those really serious things. But it was very difficult in a lot of ways. Does that qualify as trauma, Dr. Winnell? I mean, am I being overly dramatic?
Yeah, she'd be the one to know.
And she, was very kind to talk about how trauma comes in so many different forms. But it took me a while to get past that, even after I knew rationally that there was no God. Christianity especially was false. It took me another couple of years to really get over the emotional aspect of fearing hell, eternal torment, the writhing and the screaming and the flames. Mentally, rationally, I had to will myself through my hell fears. And that went on even as I was getting into the Thinking Atheist community and starting the show. It took me a while. And some people never get out. I think some people, even though they know in their mind that there's no reason to believe in, and it's hugely immoral, they still are so scarred and so terrified. They've been just indoctrinated with fear that they wrestle with it for the rest of their lives. I think it's one of the reasons that people like us do what we do, right? To try to encourage other people that, hey, you're not broken and it's okay. And a worthy God would have never created a freaking torture chamber in the first place, right?
It's so true. Well, one of the things that hit me, there's a lot of nuggets I'm getting out of the book, Leaving the Fold. One of the things that she said that really struck me, I thought, oh man, this is good. I can't bookmark it because it's on Audible and I'm driving to work. But she said, when you actually look at Christianity, what is it or who is it that we're being saved from? It's not necessarily that we're being saved from hell. We're being saved from God. That's the real problem. And she said, you look at the verse where Jesus says, don't fear the flames of hell. Essentially, fear the one who can send you to hell. That's the one you should really be afraid of, which kind of takes us back around to David Madison's book. So many of the tough sayings of Jesus, I mean, Christians, not only do they not follow it, they can't, that's the hugest irony of the whole thing. You can't apply that. They don't go around, well, some do, telling people that they're going to hell. Yeah. It's a huge disconnect.
Well, there's I asked Dr. Winnell about, if you look at the relationship that believers have with Yahweh, Jesus, it's really an abusive relationship. It's a really lot like domestic abuse, where God says, you're unworthy. You get your worth from me. Obey me. You serve me. Don't ever disobey me. If you do, you may get hurt and it will be your fault. Whatever you do, do not leave me or I will severely punish you. I mean, this is language of abuse.
Exactly.
As far as living a literal Bible, I wrote in, was it in Confessions? I think maybe it was, about a comedian. His name is A.J. Jacobs. He wrote a book called The Year of Living Biblically.
Oh,
and he decided for a year that he was going to go and try to live a literal Bible to see how that works. And he very quickly came to the realization that if he tried to live the literal Bible, he would go to prison before doing all these horrible things that were commanded. So he had to make all these adjustments, just like everyday believers, Christians. They have to make all these adjustments so that, they don't end up harming other people or themselves. That says a lot about biblical living.
It's so true. Biblical literalism. And of course, I haven't gotten to the point in your book yet, but you talk about this sort of dominionist. You were a Christian dominionist. You believed that the earth was for Christians and we needed to Christianize certainly America, if not the world, which is the thrust of dominionism, isn't it? And you think, okay, well, where does that fit into this whole project of you being the thinking atheist? Are you also taking a stand against, sort of the Christian right, the dominionist Christianity that we're seeing so much in America? Of course, allied closely with the 4 years of Trump and Trumpism. That hasn't gone away just because Trump's out of office, has it?
Well, I've taken a lot of heat for my political points of view. I used to be a Fox News Christian. I was that guy. I was Newsmax. I was Rush Limbaugh, Ann Coulter, Sean Hannity. I was that guy, And once I stepped away from the faith, I had to go back point by point and reverse engineer how I saw my value system, and realized that a humanist position was really the antithesis of much of what I had once believed. Once you remove religion as an informer of those views, then a whole lot changes. And so I'm a pretty good lefty. I'd like to think I take it situation by situation, case by case, but time and again, when it comes to issues like reproductive choice, the legalization of drugs, foreign policy, right to die issues, the death penalty, etc., I'm a liberal,
Right.
And I'd like to think that's because I'm a humanist, and my atheism does inform my humanism. If you believe that you don't believe in a God, but you believe then that human beings must solve each other's problems because there is no deity to intervene, that I believe is that humanist position does require on being a little more sensitive socially and caring more about other people and seeing not just the United States, but the USA as part of the world. And we see Americans not just as these sort of superior things that they're supposed to be, but they're part of a larger and equal human condition. And, beyond that, I used to think it was arrogant to think that humans could affect the climate. Oh, come on. There's no way we pithy humans could ever have any deleterious effects on the climate of the planet, which would cause other problems. And even if we did, Jesus is going to arrive in 6 weeks and sweep up. Yeah, I mean, he's gonna take us away, so it doesn't really matter. All the resources here, they're for our use. God provide them, whether it's plant, animal, whatever. So, I think it's a way of sort of getting out of responsibility-free card. It's a way for us to play a card that keeps us from really having to take responsibility, and it fosters short-term and often very destructive thinking. And I'm glad to have walked away from that Christian dominionism, this idea that we own everything and everybody else is just renting. That's a prison, man. I'm glad to be free of it. My world is much better today.
When we return from this conversation with Seth Andrews, we're going to get into this issue of dominionism and how it has impacted upon people who don't necessarily believe in the values of evangelical Christianity. As we say, you may have walked away from dominion theology, but it isn't walking away from you. We're going to get into this issue of the Texas abortion law, this draconian law that's just been passed. Will it be upheld in the courts? We're not sure. In fact, since that conversation, we've heard that the DOJ, Merrick Garland, is actually suing the state of Texas to stop the law because it's unconstitutional on multiple levels. So we're going to get into that when we come back. As you can hear, I've been battling a cold, so my voice is a little bit rough. So I will keep this short, otherwise my voice might give out. Just wanted to mention what's coming up here in the next few episodes on Mindshift Podcast. I've already had a fantastic conversation with Kurt Anderson, returning guest. He was on the show a little bit ago as we talked about his book Fantasyland, and it was there that I heard that he had a sequel to that book, which is called Evil Geniuses. So I said, if I read the book, will you promise to come back and talk about evil geniuses, which he did. So we had that conversation just the other day. That is the next actual episode that's going to drop. And I finally heard from Rachel Bernstein of the Indoctrination podcast. That episode is coming up just in a little bit here on her show. And then I'm going to release the second half. So after Kurt Anderson, I'm going to be releasing that other half of the conversation that Rachel and I had after we finished the part for her show. So that is finally going to drop here, which I'm really excited about. That was a fantastic conversation. And then I just wanted to mention, too, some really cool stuff that's been happening. We have taken the break for the summer. We've had our Mindshift Zoom calls. Normally we have them once a month along with our patrons-only calls. We just had our first patrons only call on the 12th of September. The first one we've had since we took the summer off. It was absolutely amazing to get in touch with everybody again, touch base, see how people are doing. We had a really good chat, really good conversation. And then we have got on the 26th of September, we've got David Johnson. He is of the Skeptics and Seekers podcast, and he was on the show a couple of months ago. We talked about the history of the church and racism in America. That was an absolutely fantastic conversation, and I'm so looking forward to bringing David in and having him meet the people in the group. And then I'm really excited to announce in the month of October, on the 24th of October, we have got Frank Schaeffer. He's going to be dropping in. In fact, we did a really, just an amazing chat with Frank about a month ago. A bunch of us got an advance copy of his book, and we did a Zoom call with him for about an hour, almost an hour and a half, talking about his new book. And that's going to drop. And also, I'm going to be talking to him for a standalone podcast about his book. So some really cool stuff with Frank Schaeffer coming up. I'm so excited. I love Frank, and I love what he's doing with his Facebook Live events and Zoom calls and all that. So I'm super excited to be helping him promote his new book. I've read through it. It's just amazing. So look for that coming up with Frank Schaeffer as well. So let's get on back into the conversation with Seth Andrews as we pick up this theme of dominionism, the Texas state abortion laws, and where all that's headed as we continue our conversation with Seth Andrews, the host of the Thinking Atheist.
However, if you lived in Texas, you're not free of it. And that's a brilliant case study, isn't it, of this very thing that you just described, whereby, okay, there's this incredibly draconian restrictive abortion law that's just been passed. Now, whether or not it's going to hold up in the courts, we don't know yet. But okay, so these guys have passed a law, and it's kind of that dominionist worldview, isn't it? We are just going to force through legislation this morality on every citizen of the state of Texas. So you could say, yes, I've walked away from a dominionism, but it hasn't walked away from us, has it? And,
No.
and if Texas succeeds, I mean, many other states are looking at that and saying, okay, if that goes through, we're doing the same thing. I mean, they've already tried in some other states, so this seems to be this agenda, doesn't it?
Well, when we see that Christianity is losing the culture war among the general population, evangelicals are on the decline, the nuns or non-religious are on the rise, people are less and less interested in religion. We're seeing a growing secularization. Well, we knew that the Christian evangelicals were not going to go quietly. We knew that their freak out would translate into some very destructive behavior, and that's exactly what has happened. What's interesting about Texas is essentially with these $10,000 fines among the citizenry for turning other people in for enabling an abortion, they are essentially, the courts have put in place a model for this weird Christian vigilante justice. It's really scary. And I thought were polarized 6 months ago, but the level of polarization that's going to happen over the abortion issue, seeing the courts weaponized over the culture, which has been the long-term goal of this hardcore Christian right for so long. I mean, you got to hand it to them.
Absolutely.
They've been well organized, they're well funded, and they're just clever to the point of, doesn't matter if they're lying or not, doesn't matter if they misrepresent abortion or not, it doesn't matter if they misrepresent their political or ideological opponents or not. They have, at least in Texas, at least temporarily, won this particular battle. I don't think the war is over, but certainly the war for the Supreme Court looks like that's been settled on the order of decades, and it really does kill a part of your heart to see it happen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and that, as you said, that's been their long-term plan, hasn't it? I talked to Frank Schaeffer just as Amy Coney Barrett was being nominated and then shoved through, minutes before the Trump election and all the rest of it. Oh, the false reelection or the rigged reelection, I should say. Yeah. But, he was saying, of course, I'm sure you're aware of his work. You probably have had him on, I'm sure, but him and his dad famously were part of starting the anti-abortion movement back in the late 70s, early 80s. And he's now hugely regretful of all that. But he said, look, I mean, this is their goal. Once they've stacked the Supreme Court, now he said, I can predict you'll see things like this, because they know if and when it does end up at that Supreme Court level, it'll probably get upheld. So surely that must have been Texas's game plan by waiting until, they've got a Supreme Court majority.
I think it's the deceit that really, and the lack of education on the issue that really bothers me beyond the Christian nationalist, anti-constitutional, anti-human rights overreach that they are hugely guilty of. I didn't have any education about reproductive systems beyond, a man and a woman get together and she gets pregnant. 9 months later, there's a kid. And in my mind, everything that happened between now and then was a baby, right? It's a soul, it's a baby, it's a human being.
Viable human being.
But I didn't understand, how this cluster of cells would develop, or when fetal cardiac activity begins, or brainwave activity begins, or what a morning after pill does or would even look like. I wasn't all that interested in whether or not a woman was able to choose, because I thought, well, at the end of the day, it's a human life that should have the ability to decide but can't. So, look, I'm going to go be the hero and decide for the baby, protect the baby. So plays back into that hero narrative that we were talking about earlier, right? And, when I finally started to get into, well, how do these reproductive processes work? I mean, beyond the fact that the overriding question is it anybody else's business? The answer is no, right? It's the mother's choice alone, really. But understanding that we're not talking about a person, the questions of personhood, I think, are important and necessary. But especially when we're talking about what Texas is talking about in the first 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we're not talking about a human being, certainly not one with a soul. We're talking about a cluster of cells that have yet to become or develop into a human being. And to sort of pull the plug on reproductive choice across the board, I think is just a massive, massive overreach. And I'm tremendously discouraged. I'm discouraged by my own states. Oklahoma's approach to it. Arkansas is having its issues. Mississippi, they imposed a draconian ban. I think it's been 2 years. 25 white guys decided they were going to essentially vote to make the decision for all the women of Mississippi. And all I know is that despite our challenges, we can't stop kicking. We got to continue to fight, sound the alarms, tooth and claw. We're going to have to go out there and try to reverse some of the damage that's being done and stop these people.
It's shocking, isn't it? I mean, that is probably the enduring legacy of the Trump era, isn't it? All the damage he did. Of course, if you're a Trumpist, he was the best president we've ever had, but
how does that even happen, right?
Yeah, he appointed so many judges. That's probably his biggest legacy, isn't it?
I think I look at, like, I knew there was a demographic of people that would respond to kind of an authoritarian cad, some charismatic dude who made, full of bravado, who would go up and chest thump and make great claims, and they would fawn and say, "Oh, he's so wonderful." I knew there were some people that would do that. I was monumentally naive. I had no idea that we'd see tens upon tens of millions of Americans do it. I had no idea that we lived in a culture where we'd see these, I see them now, these gift shops on the corners with Trump paraphernalia, the symbols of his name, the flags waving in the air. I've seen vehicles decorated with Trump and has got a muscled, bodybuilder body on him and whatnot. He's the big hero. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, too many to get into on this show, but a lot of it speaks to a lean by evangelicals into authoritarianism. They're willing to surrender the Constitution if it serves their guy and what they consider to be their godly purpose. Hey, as awful as we know he is when we're really being honest, sure, he stands in contrast to the best teachings of Jesus, but at least he's not the Democrats. At least he's not a socialist. At least he's pro-life, quote unquote, pro-life. And there's a host of rationalizations in place to excuse the awful. I'll tell you this, though, these people, if they had been raising a son and that son had done a tenth of the stuff that Donald Trump had done, they'd be horrified.
Exactly.
Going in and gawking at teen girls at Miss Teen USA. Oh my God, what's the matter with you? Who taught you? I taught you better than that. Vengeance is mine. Trump said he would get vengeance on his enemies. A Christian parent would say vengeance belongs to the Lord. Greed is bad. And yet you look at the gold gilded life of this extremely money hungry man, et cetera, et cetera. Cruelty and bullying. Right. I bullied somebody on the playground today. He was weaker than me and I conquered him. A mother would be terrified. She'd be like, I didn't raise you this way. This disgusts me. You need to be a better man than this. But if they see it in Donald Trump, that switch flips. And they're like, well, at least he's strong. I mean, it's amazing. I knew there was a shade of it. I had no idea it's as epidemic as it is. I am genuinely, palpably terrified for the future of the United States in the decade ahead. I am really scared for us. So
It's true, isn't it? And I think obviously there's been a lot of really good books written during the Trump era. You think of like Kristen Koeb's Dumais, Jesus and John Wayne. She talks about that toxic evangelical masculinity that was way in place way before Trump. You talk about in your book guys like Rush Limbaugh, even Ronald Reagan, Fox News, Roger Ailes. These people all have paved the way for Donald Trump. Christian nationalism, that was, Perry and Whitehead and Taking America Back for God. They said that was the single most important factor in people voting for Trump was Christian nationalism. So you start to put all those pieces together. This was a long time coming. It's not just a one-off phenomenon, was it?
I've got Dr. Dumais coming on the show in a few weeks to talk about that book, Jesus and John Wayne, and the Christ as warrior narrative that has fed into so many of our heroes. If you're a Christian nationalist, you don't like messy heroes. You like good, clean cut, black, white thinking, no nuance, right? You're going to go in, America first, everybody else second, and love it or leave it. And you sort of speak and act in these weird bumper stickers. Getting into complex things it's uncomfortable. It requires time and energy and patience and thoughtfulness. And this is not an attribute of Trumpistan. And again, I think too, with the internet and how it has played, and the agents of disinformation have been able to weaponize the internet. We're getting into the era now where we see the deep fake videos. So now if you see somebody say and do something, who knows if they actually said and did that thing? I'm even more terrified about the future, because now you can't trust your eyes and ears. It's going to get even worse in the years ahead.
Well, and then you throw in things like QAnon. That's a whole nother discussion, isn't it? Conspiracy theories and all that.
If I can jump in, I said to someone, I was talking to, I think it was Dr. Andy Thompson and Dr. I think it was John Watney. We were talking about Christianity itself is a conspiracy theory. Okay,
it is.
If we see people who are deeply religious in Christianity, we ask ourselves, why do they gravitate to the QAnon conspiracy theories? And I think there's a lot of reasons that they do that. But I think one is that they've been predisposed to believe in a conspiracy theory because Christianity itself, God puts together a plan which is sabotaged by the evil one. And now he maneuvers. The devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And he's out there in the dark behind every rock trying to thwart God's plan. We must be vigilant. A jihad is coming. There will be a great war. And then Satan dispatched. And then we will go off in this. And so it's this massively conspiratorial tale. Well, I mean, you're primed in Christianity to believe a conspiracy theory. So if somebody comes along with a wackadoodle story about Democrats drinking the blood of babies to sacrifice to Satan, blah, blah, blah.
Adrenochrome.
If you already believe that there's a Satan and you already are primed to think that God's a Republican, it's not that big a leap to jump into QAnon conspiracies wholeheartedly. And so I think it's another reason that we have to continue to try to criticize and dismantle these religious claims because they provide the foundation for many of the conspiracies that are built on top of them.
It's true. I was thinking when you were describing that conspiratorial era of Christianity, there was a study done by the University of Groningen. I don't know if you saw this, but they've shown there's a causal link between people who believe in, for example, young earth creationism and conspiracy theories for that same kind of logic. They, in air quotes, don't want you to know the truth, which is that the earth was actually created 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, and it goes on from there. Those people are more likely to believe that the moon landings were fake and, conspiracy theories, QAnon, they're buying straight into it. And that's why I appreciate your approach because, I think we have a lot in common in the sense that we have this sort of pastoral teacher kind of ethos to the way we approach topics, doing the research, helping people think. Because, of course, you did that one on the satanic panic, which is kind of QAnon 2.0 is now the old satanic panic. But over here in this country, there's a woman named Jeanette Archer. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's coming out just in the last few weeks. Well, she's gaining traction She claims to be a victim of satanic ritual abuse. And she says there's these global pedophiles that are harvesting children's adrenochrome. And I'm like,
Wow.
oh my God, they were just blocking down in London just a couple of weeks ago where the Tower Bridge is. They blocked traffic. They were in front of number 10 Downing Street accusing Boris Johnson of being one of these, global pedophiles, and I'm thinking, oh, Seth Andrews did a thing on the satanic panic. This is all coming back around.
Well, and the satanic panic never ended. I was
Exactly.
Interviewed for a Blumhouse documentary called Fall River, where they got into the Fall River murders of 1979 and 1980 in Massachusetts. And it was blamed at that time on the satanic influences, satanic ritual sacrifice, these horrible murders. And it turns out that was a freaking smokescreen. It wasn't about Satanism at all, but everybody bought the story, and a conviction came down because of that story. And, so when we talk about the satanic panic so often, we talk about late 70s, 1980s, 1991 through 95, et cetera. But the satanic panic is alive and well. All you have to do is look at these mega pastors. You look at people like Copeland and Paula White and Franklin Graham. I mean, they're
Greg
always
Locke,
flipping out. And I think about these people, how much confidence do they really have in their God? If God is so powerful that he could defeat Satan with a flick of his finger, and my God would never be worried. My God, the victory is already won. Yeah, it's a weird hypocrisy when you see them who in one breath say that God has already won the victory and it's all set in stone and Satan has no power here. And then they spend all the other time freaking out because Satan apparently has so much power. I don't really get that. Either he's defeated and he doesn't matter and God's won the victory, or maybe it's almost like those exorcisms. You ever see those things where, the documentaries where the priest goes in and he does like a 4-day exorcism. The power of Christ compels you. And there's all this writhing.
Head spinning and everything. Yeah.
And I always thought to myself, even when I was a believer, I thought, God didn't need 4 days to exorcise the demon. God wouldn't need all the writhing and freaking and screaming and moaning and carrying on. This is theater, right? I mean, it makes no sense to me. But it's a better story, certainly a more dramatic story whenever you add that sort of good versus evil plot twist. And then everybody, they can join the hero side. And I call it theological masturbation. I think they are genuinely self-gratifying.
Right.
They get a chance to be on the side of good. They are on the side of heroes. And then by proxy, they are heroes themselves. So it feeds that sort of sense of identity. They are the crusader in God's army going on a divine quest with eternal reward. And I can see how that would be attractive to a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. Well, like you say, you need an enemy, whether you're talking about a cult or in Christianity, you can keep Satan as the enemy. Because I was getting into, when I was studying Dominion theology, I got into R.J. Rushdoony, Christian Reconstructionism. Then that branched into the Seven Mountains Mandate, Dominion theology. Guys like Lance Wallnau, who was teaching, and Congress people in Washington D.C. and all these other people that got involved in that. And it's all about spiritual warfare, then, isn't it? You've got to conquer the mountain, and sitting atop the mountain, there's a demon. You've got to crash the gates. And I mean, that is hugely motivating for these people's followers. It's all spiritual warfare.
Well, and you think about the militarized language in the faith, where the Bible talks about the helmet of salvation and the breastplate of righteousness and the sword of peace. The shoes of peace. I don't know. I get them all confused, but there's like 7 pieces of armor. And when I was a kid, we used to sing that song that I'm in the Lord's army. And we would actually do the marching with our hands and feet. We'd march in place. Yeah, young children, right? Well, this is militarized language.
Yeah.
We are soldiers. And you mentioned Stryper. They had an album called Soldiers Under Command. And on the front of the album, they're there in their yellow and black spandex, and they're sitting on these vans with machine gun turrets mounted to the top of them.
What's that about?
And I think, Petra had an album called This Means War. There was so much militarized language in the faith, and there continues to be, because as a believer, you see it is a battle, not just a spiritual one, but potentially a physical one against the forces of Satan. And I think if you're someone like Donald Trump, et cetera, weaponizing the religion for power, there's great utility then in associating all of your opponents with the devil, right? When I was a devout Christian, I really thought that someone who was a Democrat, somebody who was then what I am now, wasn't just someone with an ideological difference of opinion, a different philosophy or value system. I was satanic. Well, if you other someone to that degree, you have then really mobilized people to do and say things they might not otherwise do and say, to go to extremes they might not otherwise go to. So this othering of people, aligning them with the darkest forces in the universe and saying, whatever happens, fear them. Don't give them a seat at the table. Be wary if they knock on your door. Feel threatened because they might be a threat. Escalation. There's so much of that going on. I'm continuing, especially in the wake of COVID and everything else. I've remained convinced that people are going to continue to get hurt in this war against the evil one. People are going to declare a literal war, possibly at the end of a rifle. So.
Well, look at Mike Lindell, Mike Flynn, Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood. These are all evangelicals that are spreading.
I mean,
Trump's
you look at January
lie.
6th, right? They're carrying crosses all
Christian
around the place. They've got, I mean, if you'd have told me that we'd see Christian nationalists smashing into our own halls of government, building a gallows outside the Capitol, and if you told me that would happen and nearly half of the country wouldn't care, I would have thought, no. It's not possible. That's an exaggeration. People would be outraged. This is America. And how wrong I would have been. And that's what I mean when I say I'm genuinely afraid over the next 10 years of what will happen next.
I think so too. I mean, here it is, just turned September. There's a thing this Mike Lindell's organizing a strike back thing on the anniversary of 9/11, where patriots need to strike back. And then I don't know if you saw this, but you got Madison Cawthorn, who's a Republican, a congressman out of, I think, North Carolina. Here's a guy who's a Christian homeschooling graduate. He went to Patrick Henry College, which is in Virginia, which is a college specifically designed for homeschoolers to propel them into politics. So he's the poster boy. And he turns around and says, well, I'd hate to have to pick up a rifle if, our elections keep getting stolen, but what are you going to do? And they're clapping for him.
We saw it with the door-to-door efforts proposed for the COVID vaccine. What if people who weren't going out, who weren't either motivated or weren't able to logistically get out to go get vaccinated in the midst of a pandemic that's killed 4.5 million people globally? What if we brought the vaccine to them? I'm like, what a great idea, right? What a great idea. And then you see pastors who go out and they say, if someone shows up at your door with a COVID vaccine, beware. Because they're not really here just for the vaccine. What they're here for is they want your guns. They want to come in and take away your guns, your freedom. They're coming after you and your kids, your God, your religion, your faith, all those things. What happens if you prime fearful people to believe that and some poor healthcare worker shows up on their door? How long before the firearms are discharged? How long before people are harmed, maimed, killed? This is escalation. This is incitement. And the lack of alarm about it is, I think, going to only fuel the danger. I hope it doesn't happen. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am.
Well, and I was going to bring that up, the whole God and guns thing, because it's all part and parcel, isn't it? Here I live in the United Kingdom. I've been here about 15 and a half years. I mean, we just don't have mass shootings. We had one, I don't know if you saw this on the news, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think it was down in either down in Plymouth or Portsmouth, but down on the South Coast, a guy was mentally unhinged and he had a shotgun, which you still can legally have. You have to go through a lot of hoops. He shot his mother and then he just wandered out in the street and just randomly started killing people until he finally killed himself. But he killed about 6 or 7 people, just absolutely randomly. Whoever just happened to be there, he just shot him. But that almost never happens in this country. We just don't have guns like you guys do in the States. But yeah. Then you've got the paranoia, the fear, the Trumpism, the QAnon, the NRA. I mean, it's a complete toxic mess, isn't it?
Someone explain to me why a divinely protected Christian needs a firearm. Why do you have to carry an AR-15 to Starbucks? Tell me why you have to carry a pistol to Starbucks. It's a hypocrisy culture. There are more firearms than there are citizens in this country. We have 390 million guns.
Yeah, you're obsessed with guns.
Yeah. I mean, any round at this point, the gorilla's out of the cage. Any roundup, it's
No.
nothing. This is not going to be solved, right?
Not going to end well.
And I'm not trying to be a hypocrite about it. I have a couple of firearms that I use. I have them. I'm licensed and trained. I have a protected safe in my home that only I know the combination to, but I don't carry them out. I don't, I have them for target shooting, but yeah. And there are some people who are genuinely peace-loving, responsible firearms owners. I'm not talking about them as much as I'm talking about the people who seem to have aligned guns with the creator of the universe, their own religious beliefs, and their notions of what freedom is in the United States. If I'm not free to own an AR-15 and carry it wherever I want, then I'm not truly free. That's terrifying to me.
How do you
and
get
again,
there?
back to the hypocrisy of I'm divinely protected and the greatest power in the universe has my back. Well, then if that's the case, you don't need, a high capacity magazine and a rifle, because you're already protected. So they really make no sense. It's a tragic comedy, the entire scenario.
It is. But yet people are getting killed, murdered daily. Well, I don't know if it's still this way. You probably know more about this than I do. Is ammunition available in America anymore? Because I know about a year ago, you couldn't buy ammo for love nor money.
Oh yeah, there's a gun show on every block here. I mean, you can find it. You can still buy ammo. But what's interesting is that time when ammo, here's what normally happens. Anytime there's somebody who's a Democrat who comes to power, the narrative becomes, they're coming for your guns. And the gun shows know this, right? Yeah. The gun shows know this. And so they weaponize that, and then they do just boffo sales. They sell a ton of firearms and ammunition. And of course, the Democratic president or whatever doesn't come. Obama didn't come for their guns. Biden doesn't come for their guns. You know what I'm saying? It has never happened. But what did happen during the last big scare is more people started homemaking their ammunition.
Yep.
Which is a thing.
It's a thing.
You can make your own ammo.
You can reload.
So now you got people at home who are making ammunition. And it's just,
where is this thing going to end?
Yeah.
Well, I was in the run up to the 2020 election. I was listening to the New York Times podcast, and they went to my hometown, which is Seattle. Now, it's pretty liberal. I mean, I lived in Seattle, Portland, pretty left leaning, real eclectic, real cool place. And it's not a real gun culture city. But he was going up and down the streets in front of a gun store. There was a line, or a queue, as we'd say in this country, literally around the block. And it was a roving reporter. He went down the line asking people, what are you doing here? Why are you 30, 40, 50 people deep buying it? What do you need a gun for? And half of them were saying, because the liberals are buying guns, and the other half was saying it's because the Trumpists are buying guns, and so it's just feeding the paranoia. A lot of them said, well, I would have never bought a gun before, but now I fucking need one, So,
well, isn't it? I mean, guns, I have come to the opinion that it's about an identity. I mean, these people have linked firearms to their identities, which is just a pathetic place to be. I mean, if you want to responsibly own a firearm, you are properly trained, and you don't have this wild apocalyptic conspiracy. They're coming over the mountain to take everything from me, even though I enjoy more freedoms than almost anybody else in the world. Kind of an attitude. Okay, I get that. I mean, I'm amazed at the manufactured persecution of people who have so much latitude in this world. You look at the American Christian, the American white evangelical, they're always like, they're coming. They're coming. This is terrible. These times we're living in it. So I get specific. All right. Well, have they taken away your right you can still go to church? Yeah. Are there Bibles in most hotel rooms? Yeah. Is there a good chance your elected official represents your faith? Yeah. Are you restricted from having Bible study in your home? No. Do you have Christian radio and TV? Yeah. Is there Christian retail? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you wear Christian jewelry and get tattoos and proselytize and take missions trips and do all those things? Yeah. Well, tell me exactly how it is and they just melt down, right? These are the most freaking spoiled, rotten, privileged people on the planet, convinced that somehow they're persecuted, but they cannot tell you exactly how they're being persecuted.
They've got it down to a science, haven't they? Because as you say, when it's a Democratic president in charge, the Christian right is stoking all those fears. They're going to take your guns. They're going to take your rights. They were doing it during the COVID lockdowns, talked about the so-called COVID passport. What they really want is to restrict, as you said, your right to go to church and go on mission trips and all these other things. That's what this whole COVID thing is all about, man. It's all about taking your rights away as a Christian, the whole thing.
I think, some of that is because even the Bible says that the best Christians are the ones persecuted for Christ. What do you do if you live in absolute privilege and you are not at all persecuted, but the Bible says, blessed are those who are persecuted for my sake? What do I do? Well, I'll just manufacture them. I mean, if I'm going to be the hero of the story, I need a villain. I need a cause. And so they just make it up. They just manufacture the persecution. I did a podcast conversation with a constitutional attorney named Andrew Seidel from the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Yeah, I've had him on.
We titled the broadcast, "Do We Live in a Shared Reality?" And we both came quickly to the conclusion, no. You and I and the Christian nationalists do not share a reality. They live in Xanadu. They live off in some other place somewhere where up is down and 2 + 2 = 5. And it's just a terrifying place to see over from this vantage.
Bizarro world, living in bizarro world. Well, I know it's getting close to an hour. You've got to go. You've got other stuff to do, but I really appreciate hanging out with you for an hour, kind of getting to know you a little bit. I wanted to say again, like I said before, I really appreciate your whole approach because I resonate with it a lot, where you're not this shrill. You could be, I suppose. I don't know if you were an angry atheist, but.
Well, I have my moments. I think anger is just, I would never tell anybody how to respond to how religion treated them. But I have my moments when I get, good and
fired
pissed
up
off. And I have my moments where I'm kind of a teddy bear. And, I think I run the gamut. But at the end of the day, I think in order for us to attract people, we have to be attractive whenever possible, not in a disingenuous way, not in a way that's fake. But I mean, if we're going to ask people to leave this hugely attractive and comforting religious model, they're there. That's where their friends are, their family, the support system. That's the routines they know. It's comfort. We're going to ask them to put all that on the bubble. What are we offering in return? I think we need to offer some positives in the human experience. We're going to have to tell them it's okay. There's room here. There's a place for you. There's love and joy and happiness and purpose and all these things. There's more. There's got to be more to activism than screw religion. Religion is stupid. Here's a meme. Here's me calling somebody out. Here's the vitriol and all that stuff. I think we're going to have to do a better job of accentuating the positives and showing them that life is good on this side of the fence. Life is better on this side of the fence. And if I've done any of that at all, I feel like I've accomplished something. So.
It's so true, isn't it? And this is, again, going back to leaving the fold. Marlene Winnell says, when you walk away from religion, Christianity in particular, it's so empowering, because you are in control and you have to deal with the consequences of whatever choices you make, but at least you're not relying on God. Christianity, it takes away our agency in so many ways, doesn't it? And it's like she said, you've got to learn to enjoy life because you're responsible. This is your life to live. So I feel like that's definitely the journey I'm on. It sounds like you've been on that journey probably a long time before me.
Gail Jordan up at Recovering from Religion says it best. She just tells people there's so much more light, air, and space on this side of the religion question.
So true.
And I think let's be that. Let's be the person who rings that bell. Hey, everybody, I'm doing battle with fundies, and we're going to go call out the horrible stuff. And yes, we've got problems in the movement, and good luck to defining the movement. Yes, we have to root out bad agents. Yes, there's drama and chaos sometimes. Yes, we're all flawed, fallible human beings. But there's, at the end of the day, there's just more light, air, and space over here. You will love it over here. And if we can help sort of sing that song a little more effectively, I think that's probably one of the most important things we can do as activists.
Really true. Well, I need to let you go. I was going to ask you before you go, for maybe the one or two people that don't know where to find you, where can they get a hold of you on social media, and where's your podcast handle and all that?
Yeah, it's funny. We're coming up on 600 podcasts. We started in 2010. It's a show that drops on Tuesdays of every week, but you can find my videos and podcasts and links to other atheist resources on the main website, thethinkingatheist.com. And then if you want to know more about me or my books or my work or speeches or whatever, you can go to sethandrews.com. So that's kind of a 1-2 punch, thethinkingatheist.com and sethandrews.com.
Well, listen, Seth, I'll let you go. I really appreciate talking to you. Anytime you want to come back in, please hit me up. I would love to talk to you again.
It's been an honor, my friend. Thank you.